The flashing red and blue lights didn't paint the asphalt of some hostile, bombed-out sector overseas. For Major General Joseph Caldwell, a highly decorated combat veteran, the battlefield was now the pristine, manicured concrete of an upscale North Dallas suburb. What began as a racially motivated, entirely illegal stop by two arrogant patrolmen quickly escalated into the worst mistake of their lives. They slapped cuffs on a man holding top-secret clearance and a direct line to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Then, he made one phone call. The crisp October morning air hung heavy with the scent of fallen oak leaves and wet pavement. At 5:42 a.m., the affluent enclave of Southlake, Texas, was entirely still, a portrait of suburban tranquility. This was the kind of neighborhood where manicured lawns stretched perfectly to the curb, and high-end security systems hummed silently behind massive mahogany doors. It was a place where people paid millions for peace, privacy, and the illusion of absolute safety. For Major General Joseph Caldwell, this neighborhood was his sanctuary. After 28 years in the United States Army, including 3 grueling combat deployments, a stint at the Pentagon, and his current high-pressure advisory role to the Joint Chiefs, he valued the quiet more than most. At 52, Joseph was in peak physical condition. His mind was as sharp as a newly honed bayonet, and his daily 6-mile run was the only time he allowed himself to unplug from the monumental weight of national security. On this particular Tuesday, Joseph wore a faded, oversized gray sweatshirt from his alma mater, West Point, black running tights, and a black fleece beanie pulled low over his ears to fight the autumn chill. Without the stars on his shoulders, the perfectly pressed dress uniform, or the formidable aura he carried into the briefing rooms of Washington, D.C., he looked like anyone else trying to get a workout in before the sun came up. But in the eyes of the 2 men sitting inside Colleyville Police Cruiser 44, he didn't look like an American hero. He looked like a suspect. Officer Marcus Vance had been on the force for 14 years. He was a cynical, hardened man who had allowed the worst parts of his job to slowly erode his humanity. His partner, Officer Brian Miller, was a rookie, barely 6 months out of the academy, eager to please and entirely dependent on Vance for guidance. As they rolled slowly down Oak Crest Drive, their headlights cut through the morning mist, catching Joseph's silhouette as he jogged at a steady, rhythmic pace along the sidewalk. "Slow down," Vance muttered, his eyes narrowing as he gripped the steering wheel. He tapped the brakes, matching his speed to the runner's stride. Miller looked up from the onboard computer. "What is it?" "We got a call?" Miller asked. "No call," Vance replied, his voice laced with an unearned, heavy authority. "Just looking at that runner." "You recognize him?" Miller squinted through the windshield. "No, just looks like someone out for a morning jog, man." "In this neighborhood?" Vance scoffed, a dark, judgmental sneer forming on his lips. "At this hour, wearing a baggy hoodie and a face-covering beanie, he doesn't fit the profile of a Southlake homeowner." Vance adjusted his duty belt. "Miller, we had those porch pirates in the adjoining subdivision last week. Someone casing the neighborhood would dress exactly like that." "Porch pirates usually have a car," Miller offered weakly, trying to inject some logic into the situation. "He's literally just running, Marcus." "You let me handle the policing, kid," Vance snapped. He hit the accelerator, pulling the cruiser sharply to the right, cutting across the driveway apron and directly blocking Joseph's path. Joseph's heart rate was at a steady 140 beats per minute. He was deep in thought, mentally organizing a logistics report regarding troop movements in Eastern Europe, when the blinding glare of the police spotlight suddenly hit him squarely in the face. He instinctively threw a hand up to shield his eyes, his running shoes skidding to a halt on the concrete. The cruiser's tires chirped against the curb. Before the car was even fully in park, Vance threw his door open and stepped out into the chilly air, his hand resting casually but menacingly on his service weapon. "Hold it right there!" Vance barked, his voice echoing loudly down the quiet street. Joseph stood perfectly still. Decades of military discipline immediately kicked in. His breathing slowed, his posture straightened, and he assessed the situation with the cold, calculating precision of a battlefield commander. Two officers. One veteran with an aggressive, dominant posture. One rookie hanging back, looking visibly nervous. The spotlight was a standard psychological tactic to disorient. "Good morning, officers," Joseph said. His voice was deep, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. "Is there a problem?" "I'm the one asking the questions," Vance retorted, taking 2 heavy steps toward him. "Where are you coming from?" "My home," Joseph replied, pointing a thumb over his shoulder. "About 2 miles in that direction. I'm doing a loop." "Your home?" Vance repeated, his tone dripping with condescending disbelief. He looked Joseph up and down, taking in the faded sweatshirt and his dark skin. "You live here? In South Lake?" "I do, at 402 Oakcrest Drive." "That's a $4 million property," Vance said, taking another step closer, aggressively invading Joseph's personal space. "So you're telling me you own that house?" Joseph's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what was happening. He had seen it on the news. He had counseled young minority soldiers about it, and he had experienced a milder version of it in his younger years. But to experience it now, at the pinnacle of his career, just blocks from the home he paid for with blood, sweat, and decades of service to his country, ignited a cold, hard fury in his chest. "I'm not going to stand here and justify my financial status to you, officer," Joseph said firmly. "I am out for a run. I have broken no laws. If you are not detaining me, I am going to continue my workout." He went to step around the hood of the police cruiser. "Hey!" Vance shouted, his face flushing red. "I didn't say you were dismissed. Stop right there or I'm putting you in cuffs." The word cuffs hung in the air, a violent threat shattering the morning peace. Officer Miller, the rookie, finally stepped out of the passenger side, looking nervously between his partner and the imposing man standing on the sidewalk. "Marcus, maybe we should just—" Miller started. "Quiet, Miller," Vance snapped. He turned his full, aggressive attention back to Joseph. "I need to see some identification right now." Joseph took a slow, deep breath, maintaining unbreakable eye contact. "I don't have identification on me. As you can see, I am wearing running tights. I have my house key tied to my shoelace and my phone in this armband. That is all. No ID." "No ID," Vance said, a triumphant smirk crossing his face. "Of course not. Wandering around a high-income neighborhood at 5:40 in the morning with no ID, claiming you live in a mansion down the street. Put your hands on the hood of the car." Joseph did not move. The absolute audacity of the command vibrated through his bones. In the Pentagon, high-ranking officials waited for his clearance to speak in certain briefing rooms. Yet here, a beat cop with a chip on his shoulder was treating him like a petty thief on a street corner. "Officer," Joseph said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the undeniable weight of command. "I'm going to say this to you once. You do not have reasonable, articulable suspicion to detain me, let alone demand identification in a state that does not have a stop and identify statute, unless an arrest is actively being made. I have informed you of my address. I am going home." For a split second, Vance hesitated. The authoritative, legally precise way this man spoke threw him off balance. People usually panicked, stuttered, or got immediately defensive. This man spoke like a federal judge, but Vance's ego quickly overpowered his common sense. He couldn't let someone talk to him like that in front of his rookie. It undermined his authority. "Are you refusing a lawful order?" Vance growled, closing the distance between them in 2 aggressive strides. "It is not a lawful order," Joseph countered, standing his ground. Without another word, Vance lunged forward, grabbing Joseph's left forearm with a harsh, bruising grip. The physical contact was jarring. In a fraction of a second, Joseph's combat reflexes surged. His muscle memory calculated the exact leverage needed to flip Vance over his hip, hyperextend his elbow, and drop him to the concrete before the rookie could even unholster his weapon. But the rational, strategic part of his brain, the general, overrode the soldier. If he fought back, he would just be another statistic, another tragic headline. He needed to let them dig their own grave. He would fight this war not with his fists, but with the full, devastating power of the institutions he helped command. He forced his muscles to relax, offering no physical resistance as Vance aggressively twisted his arm behind his back. "Hey, take it easy," Miller yelled, stepping forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Marcus, there's no need to rough him up." "He's resisting," Vance shouted, a complete fabrication designed to justify his use of force to the cruiser's dash cam. He shoved Joseph roughly against the cold metal hood of the cruiser. The metal bit into Joseph's cheek. "I am completely compliant," Joseph said loudly, ensuring Miller and the audio equipment caught every word. "I am not resisting. You are using excessive force." Click, click. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists, biting painfully into his skin. They were tightened far past regulations, pinching a nerve, but Joseph didn't wince. He stared at the reflection of the flashing police lights in the cruiser's windshield. "You have the right to remain silent," Vance sneered, practically spitting the Miranda warning into his ear as he patted him down in a way that was far too rough to be professional. He ripped the phone from Joseph's armband and tossed it onto the hood. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Just then, the front door of a house across the street creaked open. Mr. Harrison, a retired corporate attorney who lived 2 doors down from Joseph, had come out to grab his morning paper. He froze on his porch, his jaw dropping as he watched the scene unfold under the streetlights. "Hey!" Mr. Harrison called out, clutching his robe tightly. "What on earth are you doing to him?" Vance shot a glare across the yard. "Police business, sir. Go back inside your home." "He's my neighbor," Mr. Harrison yelled back, taking a bold step onto his lawn. "That's Joe. He lives right there." Vance ignored him, roughly grabbing Joseph by the bicep and pulling him away from the hood. "Get in the car," he ordered, opening the back door of the cruiser. "You're making a catastrophic mistake, Officer Vance," Joseph said quietly, reading the name tag as he ducked his head to enter the vehicle. Yeah, save it for the judge," Vance laughed mockingly, slamming the heavy door shut. As he sat in the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the police cruiser, Joseph's hands were throbbing. The smell of stale sweat, chemical cleaner, and cheap vinyl assaulted his nose. He watched through the wire mesh as Vance strutted back to the driver's side while Miller climbed into the passenger seat, looking pale and deeply conflicted. The engine roared, the car pulled away from the curb, and Major General Joseph Caldwell was officially under arrest. The drive to the Tarrant County Detention Facility took 20 agonizing minutes. In the back of the cruiser, Joseph sat perfectly upright, refusing to lean back and give them the satisfaction of seeing him uncomfortable. The handcuffs dug deeper into his wrists with every pothole, sending sharp shooting pains up his forearms. Up front, the dynamic between the 2 officers was rapidly fracturing. "Marcus, did you hear that guy on the porch?" Miller asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "He said he was his neighbor. He knew his name." "People lie, Miller," Vance dismissed with a wave of his hand, adjusting the rearview mirror to glare at Joseph. "Criminals cover for each other. You think a guy like that owns a mansion on Oak Crest? Come on, we got him on failure to identify, resisting arrest, and suspicious activity. It's an open and shut case." "But what if he really does live there?" Miller pressed his hands together, nervously wringing his radio cord. "We didn't even run his name. We didn't do anything by the book." "The book is a guideline, kid," Vance snapped. "Out here on the streets, you go with your gut. My gut says he's trouble." Joseph remained silent. "Never interrupt an enemy when he is making a mistake," Napoleon had said. It was a principle Joseph had taught at the Army War College. Vance was arrogant, sloppy, and blinded by his own prejudices. He was practically gift-wrapping his own termination papers, and Joseph was going to let him tie the bow. The cruiser finally pulled into the heavily secured parking lot of the regional precinct. The sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the North Texas horizon in bruised shades of purple and gray. Vance parked the car, walked around to the back, and yanked the door open. "Out!" he commanded. Joseph stepped out, his legs stiff from the cramped ride. Vance grabbed his arm again, parading him through the heavy glass double doors of the precinct like a trophy. The booking processing area was a bustling, chaotic hub, even at 6:12 in the morning. Phones were ringing, officers were typing reports, and the harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry hornets. At the front desk sat Desk Sergeant Gallagher, a balding, exhausted-looking veteran holding a styrofoam cup of black coffee. "Look what the cat dragged in," Gallagher muttered as Vance marched Joseph up to the booking counter. "What have we got, Vance? Suspicious prowler, resisting arrest, refusing to identify?" Vance rattled off proudly. He slammed Joseph's encrypted phone down on the counter. "Caught him casing houses in Southlake." Gallagher sighed, pulling a booking form toward him. He looked up at Joseph, noting his calm demeanor, his upright posture, and the complete lack of fear in his eyes. It was highly unusual. Most people brought in off the street were crying, screaming, or visibly shaking. This man looked like he was evaluating the structural integrity of the building. "All right," Gallagher said, picking up a pen. "Let's make this easy. What's your name?" Joseph looked directly at Gallagher. "Joseph Caldwell." Gallagher wrote it down. "Date of birth?" Joseph provided it without hesitation. "Address?" 402 Oak Crest Drive, Southlake, Texas, Joseph said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. Several heads turned at the mention of the exclusive neighborhood. Vance laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Yeah, right. Write down transient, Sarge. He's delusional." "I am stating my legal residence for the official record," Joseph said, fixing Gallagher with a piercing stare that made the desk sergeant shift uncomfortably in his chair. "I suggest you document it accurately." Gallagher cleared his throat, suddenly feeling a strange sense of intimidation, though he couldn't pinpoint why. He wrote the address down exactly as Joseph said it. "All right, Caldwell. We need your shoelaces, your beanie, and anything else in your pockets." Miller stepped forward and awkwardly untied Joseph's running shoes, pulling the laces out. He took the house key and placed it in a plastic evidence bag. Vance snatched the black beanie off Joseph's head, revealing his closely cropped hair. "Take him to holding cell 3, Gallagher instructed. "We'll run his prints and see who he really is." Vance grabbed Joseph's arm once more, leading him down a narrow cinder-block hallway that smelled of ammonia and despair. He unlocked a heavy steel door and practically shoved him inside. "Make yourself comfortable, Joe," Vance sneered. "You're going to be here a while." "I need my phone," Joseph said calmly, standing in the center of the cell. "I am legally entitled to a phone call." Vance leaned against the bars, a malicious grin on his face. "Oh, you'll get your call, eventually, when we're done processing you. Maybe in a few hours, maybe after lunch. It depends on how cooperative you decide to be." "Officer Vance," Joseph said, stepping up to the bars. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice, but the absolute chilling authority in his tone made Vance's smile falter for a fraction of a second. "You are violating standard operating procedures, my civil rights, and multiple departmental regulations. I strongly advise you to hand me my phone right now." Vance recovered quickly, masking his momentary unease with louder bluster. "Is that a threat? You threatening a police officer?" "It's a tactical assessment," Joseph replied coldly. "You have detained a United States citizen without cause. Give me my phone." "Sit down and shut up," Vance barked, banging his baton against the steel bars with a deafening clang. He turned on his heel and stormed back down the hallway, leaving Joseph in the dim, cold cell. Joseph stood perfectly still until the footsteps faded away. Then he slowly turned and sat on the hard concrete bench bolted to the wall. He wasn't angry anymore. Anger was an uncontrolled emotion, and Joseph Caldwell never lost control. He was focused. He was calculating. He reviewed the faces of everyone he had interacted with, memorizing badge numbers, timestamps, and quotes. He looked at his wrists now, bruised in dark purple rings where the metal had dug into his skin. He thought of his grandfather, who had served in segregated units. He thought of his troops, whom he ordered into danger to protect the freedoms that had just been so casually stripped from him. They thought they had arrested a nobody, a nameless, faceless black man they could bully to satisfy their egos. They didn't know they had just locked up the deputy director of strategic logistics for the United States military. Joseph leaned his head back against the cold cinder block wall and waited. He was a master of logistics, after all, and he was about to orchestrate the total systemic dismantling of Officer Marcus Vance's career. All he needed was that one phone call. The regional processing facility operated on a predictable rhythm of local misdemeanors, traffic violations, and the occasional burglary. Desk Sergeant Gallagher knew how to read the newly arrested, but the man in holding cell 3 was an anomaly that made his seasoned instincts itch. While Joseph sat silently in the cold cell, Gallagher took his rolled fingerprints, which Miller had awkwardly processed before putting him away, and scanned the physical card into the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, AFIS, syncing it with the FBI's National Crime Information Center database. "Hey, Sarge," Officer Vance called out, leaning against the break room door frame with a fresh cup of coffee, looking incredibly pleased with himself. "He giving you any trouble? Usually, the rich neighborhood prowlers start crying for their lawyers by now. He hasn't made a peep, which is exactly why I'm running his Prince priority," Gallagher muttered, his eyes glued to the loading bar on his dual-monitor setup. "Something about him doesn't sit right. He didn't flinch when you slammed him onto the hood, Vance. Normal people flinch. He's a hardened criminal, Gallagher. Probably done time," Vance laughed, taking a long sip of his coffee. "You'll see. He's probably got warrants out of Dallas or Houston." The loading bar hit 100%. The screen flickered. Instead of pulling up a standard local criminal record or returning a no match found, the primary monitor instantly went completely black. A second later, a solid, blindingly bright crimson banner locked across the top of the screen. A high-pitched, digitized alert tone, one Gallagher had never heard in his 22 years on the force, beeped 3 times in rapid succession. Gallagher stopped breathing. The styrofoam cup in his hand crumpled slightly, hot coffee spilling over his knuckles, but he didn't even feel it. He stared at the words, "Flag Officer." "Vance," Gallagher whispered, his voice trembling. "What, he got warrants?" Vance asked, chuckling as he strolled over to the desk. "Vance, you colossal, unbelievable idiot," Gallagher breathed, his face draining of all color. He pointed a shaking finger at the monitor. "Look at the screen." Vance leaned over the desk. He squinted at the red banner. "Top secret. Department of Defense." What is this? A glitch in the system? The machine is pulling up some federal file by mistake. "The machine doesn't make mistakes with fingerprints, Marcus." Gallagher suddenly exploded, his voice echoing across the bullpen and causing several officers to stop typing. "Do you know what a flag officer is? It means he's a general. You just arrested a United States general." Officer Miller, who had been filling out paperwork at a nearby desk, dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the linoleum floor. A general? I told you, Marcus. I told you we should have run his name." "Shut up, Miller," Vance snapped, though a sudden icy bead of sweat broke out on his forehead. "It's a mistake, some kind of identity theft. People use fake identities all the time. There is no way a black guy jogging in a hoodie at 5 in the morning is a general at the Pentagon." Gallagher ignored him. He violently yanked open his desk drawer, grabbed the plastic evidence bag containing Joseph's belongings, and ripped it open. He pulled out the smartphone. It was a standard-issue, government-encrypted device. "I am taking him this phone," Gallagher said, his voice deadly serious. "And you, Vance, are going to stand right here and pray to whatever God you believe in that he is in a forgiving mood." Gallagher hurried down the cinderblock hallway, his heavy boots echoing loudly. He practically sprinted to holding cell 3. When he arrived, he found Joseph sitting exactly as Vance had left him, perfectly still, his posture impeccably straight, his eyes fixed on the heavy steel door. "Sir," Gallagher stammered, unlocking the slot in the bars and sliding the phone through. Your phone call." Joseph calmly stood up, walked over, and picked up the device. "Thank you, Sergeant Gallagher. Am I to understand my fingerprints have cleared the system?" Gallagher swallowed hard. "Yes, General Caldwell. I apologize for the delay." "The delay is the least of this precinct's concerns," Joseph said evenly. He turned his back to the sergeant, dialed a secure 10-digit number, and waited. After 3 rings, a crisp voice answered on the other end. "National Military Command Center, Major Davis speaking." "Major, this is Major General Joseph Caldwell. Authentication code, Echo Victor 79, Bravo." "Authentication confirmed, General Caldwell," the major replied instantly, his tone shifting to immediate deference. "Go ahead, sir. Patch me through to Lieutenant General Richard Montgomery. Priority override." "Right away, General." There was a brief click, followed by a moment of static. Then, a deep, gruff voice boomed through the receiver. "Joe, it's 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. You're usually halfway through your debrief prep. What's the situation?" "Richard, we have a slight tactical disruption," Joseph said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I am currently locked in holding cell 3 at the regional holding facility in Colleyville, Texas." Silence hung on the line for 3 agonizing seconds. "Excuse me?" Lieutenant General Montgomery finally said, his voice dangerously low. "Did you say you are in a holding cell?" "I was detained outside my residence by 2 patrol officers, handcuffed, forcibly placed in a vehicle, and transported. The charges, as I understand them, are failure to identify, resisting arrest, and suspicious activity." "Were you injured, Joe?" "Bruised wrists, nothing compromising, but my patience is severely depleted." "I am pulling up the precinct's coordinates right now," Montgomery growled, the sound of rapid typing audible in the background. "They put hands on a flag officer with a level 5 security clearance? This is a massive breach of federal security protocols. Who is the commanding officer of that precinct?" "I haven't met him yet. Only the desk sergeant and the 2 arresting officers, Marcus Vance and Brian Miller." "Joe, sit tight. You're about to have the entire weight of the Department of Defense come down on that building. I am dispatching Colonel Dawson from CID along with Federal Legal Counsel. They will be there in 20 minutes. "Understood, Richard. Caldwell out." Joseph ended the call and turned back to the cell bars. Sergeant Gallagher was still standing there, looking like a man waiting for a firing squad. "Sergeant," Joseph said softly. "Yes, General? I highly recommend you call your precinct captain. He's going to want to be awake for this." Captain Thomas O'Reilly was a man who appreciated order. He had run the precinct for 6 years with an iron fist and a strict adherence to protocol. At 6:45 a.m., he was in his home kitchen pouring a bowl of cereal when his cell phone rang. It wasn't the standard precinct line. It was the direct ringtone of the chief of police. O'Reilly answered instantly, standing at attention in his kitchen. "Tom, what the hell is going on in your precinct?" The chief's voice was a frantic shout. "I just got a call from the mayor, who just got a call from the governor, who was just woken up by the Secretary of Defense." O'Reilly dropped his spoon. It shattered the silence of the kitchen. The Secretary of Defense, sir? I don't understand." "One of your idiot patrolmen arrested a Pentagon general, Major General Joseph Caldwell. They booked him like a common prowler for jogging in his own damn neighborhood," the chief roared. "The Military Criminal Investigation Command is mobilizing. The FBI field office is en route. The Department of Justice is literally drafting civil rights indictments as we speak. You have 10 minutes to get to your precinct and fix this before federal agents dismantle your building brick by brick." The line went dead. O'Reilly didn't even bother changing out of his civilian clothes. He grabbed his badge, sprinted to his car, and drove 90 miles an hour down the interstate with his emergency lights flashing. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere had shifted from routine boredom to absolute panic. Vance's fabricated charges were collapsing under the slightest mental scrutiny. He claimed jogging in a hoodie was suspicious activity, but exercising in one's own neighborhood provided no reasonable, articulable suspicion for a stop. His failure to identify charge was equally baseless. Texas law only requires identification if a person has been lawfully arrested for an offense, and Joseph had verbally provided his name and address regardless. Finally, the resisting arrest accusation was a complete fabrication meant to justify unlawful force, easily disproven by the video evidence of his compliance. Vance was pacing in the bullpen, chewing on his thumbnail. His bravado was beginning to crack, replaced by a creeping, nauseating terror. Miller was sitting at his desk, his head buried in his hands, silently crying. "It's fake," Vance kept repeating to anyone who would listen. "It's a sophisticated fake. He's a sovereign citizen or something. They hack these systems. I did the right thing." Nobody was listening to him. At exactly 7:02 a.m., the heavy glass doors of the precinct didn't just open, they were practically blown off their hinges. 3 black, heavily armored Chevrolet Suburbans had jumped the curb and parked directly on the front plaza. Out stepped 6 individuals. 4 were massive men in tactical gear with the letters CID emblazoned in stark yellow on their backs. Leading them was Colonel Bradley Dawson, a man whose resting face looked like it was carved from granite. Beside him was William Hastings, a razor-sharp federal attorney representing the Pentagon. The bullpen went completely silent. Phones rang, but no one answered them. Colonel Dawson marched straight up to the booking desk, looming over Sergeant Gallagher. "I am Colonel Bradley Dawson, United States Army Criminal Investigation Division," his voice boomed, rattling the cheap acoustic tiles of the ceiling. "I am here for Major General Joseph Caldwell. Where is he?" Captain O'Reilly, who had arrived just 2 minutes prior and was completely out of breath, rushed out of his back office. "Colonel, I am Captain O'Reilly. I am so terribly sorry. Save your apologies for the congressional hearing, Captain," Hastings, the attorney, interrupted smoothly. He dropped a heavy leather briefcase onto the counter. "You are illegally holding a senior military official with top-secret clearance. This constitutes federal kidnapping under Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 1201, considering the absolute lack of any lawful jurisdiction or probable cause." O'Reilly turned pale. "Kidnapping? Now, hold on. My officers believed—" "I don't care what your officers believed," Dawson snarled. "I want that cell door opened right now." Vance, desperately clinging to the last shreds of his ego, stepped forward. "Hold on a second. I'm the arresting officer." He refused to ID himself. He was prowling. Dawson turned his gaze to Vance. It was a look that had silenced hardened terrorists in active war zones. "Are you Officer Marcus Vance?" Yeah, I am." "You are a disgrace to that uniform," Dawson said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You profiled, assaulted, and falsely imprisoned a decorated veteran who has done more for this country before 0600 than you will do in your entire miserable life. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Vance blinked, stunned. "What? You can't arrest me. I'm a cop." "You're a civil rights violator who just triggered a federal incident," Hastings corrected. "The Department of Justice has authorized your immediate detainment pending federal charges for deprivation of rights under color of law." 2 of the CID tactical agents stepped forward, grabbing Vance by the arms. The sheer irony of the moment wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Less than 2 hours ago, Vance had been the one aggressively snapping cuffs onto an innocent man. Now, he was being manhandled, his own wrists slammed together behind his back. The loud click-click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent bullpen. Miller watched from his desk, trembling violently. When one of the federal agents looked in his direction, Miller immediately stood up and placed his own hands behind his back, surrendering without a single word. "Sergeant," Captain O'Reilly said, his voice hollow, "get the keys. Let's go." A grim procession walked down the cinder-block hallway. Gallagher, O'Reilly, Dawson, and Hastings approached holding cell 3. Gallagher's hands shook so badly he dropped the keys twice before finally fitting the heavy iron key into the lock. The tumblers clanked, and the heavy steel door swung outward. Major General Joseph Caldwell was standing in the center of the cell, exactly as he had been. He looked at the men assembled before him. He didn't look relieved. He didn't look traumatized. He looked like a commanding officer inspecting his troops after a battle. "General Caldwell," Colonel Dawson said, snapping a crisp, perfect salute. "Sir, we have secured the perimeter. Your transport is waiting." Joseph returned the salute flawlessly. "Thank you, Colonel." He walked out of the cell, stepping past the pale, sweating Captain O'Reilly without giving him a single glance. He walked down the hallway into the bullpen. As he passed, every single police officer in the room stood up from their desks, some out of respect, most out of sheer, unadulterated fear. He paused near the booking desk where Marcus Vance was now standing in handcuffs, looking absolutely shattered, his face pale and eyes wide with the sudden realization of his ruined life. Joseph stopped and looked at him. He didn't gloat. He didn't yell. The silence he commanded was 1,000 times more devastating than any insult he could have hurled. "I told you, Officer Vance," Joseph said quietly, his voice carrying across the absolutely silent room. "You were making a catastrophic mistake." He turned and walked through the glass doors into the morning sun, leaving the burning wreckage of Vance's career in his wake. The silence that General Joseph Caldwell left in his wake at the precinct was not a peaceful one. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of a bomb having detonated in a closed room, leaving everyone deafened and shell-shocked. Through the shattered glass of the front doors, the remaining patrol officers watched the armored black Suburbans smoothly pull away from the curb, merging into the morning traffic and disappearing toward Dallas. They had taken the general. They had left a nightmare. Captain Thomas O'Reilly stood frozen in the center of the bullpen. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of control, and in a span of 30 minutes, that control had been utterly pulverized. "Captain," Sergeant Gallagher croaked from behind the booking desk. His voice cracked, sounding like a frightened child. "What? What do we do?" O'Reilly didn't have a chance to answer. Before he could even open his mouth, the wail of sirens pierced the morning air. But these weren't local police sirens. They were the distinct, multi-tonal blares of federal law enforcement. 4 dark blue Ford Explorers swerved into the precinct parking lot, boxing in the remaining squad cars. Doors flew open, and a dozen agents wearing navy blue windbreakers with FBI printed in stark yellow lettering swarmed the building. Leading the charge was Special Agent in Charge Sarah Higgins, a fierce, no-nonsense veteran of the Civil Rights Division. Higgins marched through the ruined front doors, flanked by 2 armed agents carrying empty evidence boxes. She zeroed in on Captain O'Reilly. "Captain Thomas O'Reilly?" Higgins asked, flashing a gold badge that caught the harsh fluorescent light. "Yes," O'Reilly stammered, pulling at the collar of his civilian shirt, suddenly acutely aware he wasn't in uniform. "Agent Higgins, FBI Civil Rights Division. We are officially taking over this precinct pending a full federal investigation into systemic civil rights abuses," Higgins declared loudly, her voice carrying no warmth. "As of this moment, your network servers are being seized, your dispatch logs are being impounded, and every officer who was on duty during the unlawful arrest of General Caldwell is confined to quarters pending interrogation." "Agent Higgins, please," O'Reilly pleaded, raising his hands. This was the action of one rogue officer, Marcus Vance. "He's already in custody with CID. My department had no idea." "Save it, Captain," Higgins interrupted sharply. The Department of Justice doesn't believe in lone wolves when it comes to a culture of impunity. We are freezing all federal grants to this precinct effective immediately. We are also initiating a full review of the 1,033 program military surplus equipment your department possesses. I want the keys to Vance's locker, his patrol vehicle, and I want the body camera footage from the last 12 months. While the FBI tore the precinct apart, Officer Marcus Vance was experiencing a terrifying new reality. He was placed in an uncomfortably sterile interrogation room at the FBI field office in Dallas. The handcuffs had been removed, but the door was locked from the outside. There were no windows, only a two-way mirror and a single camera mounted in the corner. Vance sat at the metal table, his hands shaking so violently he had to fold them in his lap to hide the tremors. The door clicked open. Attorney William Hastings, the razor-sharp federal counsel representing the Pentagon, walked in alongside Special Agent Higgins. They didn't sit down. They stood over Vance, forcing him to look up at them. "Officer Vance," Hastings began, his voice smooth but laced with venom. "Do you understand the gravity of the federal statutes you violated this morning?" "I made a mistake," Vance blurted out, his voice a pathetic whine compared to the arrogant sneer he had worn just hours earlier. It was dark. He looked suspicious. "I was just doing my job, trying to keep the neighborhood safe." "Safe from what exactly?" Agent Higgins asked, dropping a thick manila folder onto the table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "Safe from black men who own property worth more than you'll make in 3 lifetimes?" "That's not what this is about," Vance protested, his face flushing red. "We seized your personal phone, Marcus," Higgins said, opening the folder and sliding a printed sheet of text messages across the table. "You thought you were so clever, didn't you? Using an encrypted app to talk to Arthur Pendleton, the vice president of the Oak Crest Homeowners Association." Vance's blood ran cold. The color completely drained from his face. Higgins leaned down, placing a manicured finger on a highlighted text message. "Timestamp 5:27 a.m. today. A message from Mr. Pendleton to you. That new guy at 402 is out running again. He's bringing down the property value just by being here. Give him a scare, Marcus. Let him know this isn't his kind of town." Hastings crossed his arms, his eyes boring into Vance. "And your reply, sent at 5:31 a.m. Copy that, Arthur. I'll make sure he gets the message loud and clear. Might even give him a free ride to the station." The room went dead silent. The faint hum of the air conditioning sounded like a jet engine in Vance's ears. "This wasn't a mistake, Marcus," Higgins said softly, the quietness of her tone somehow more terrifying than a shout. "This was a premeditated conspiracy to deprive a United States citizen of his civil rights based on race under the color of law. That is a direct violation of Title 18, U.S. Code, Sections 241 and 242. You colluded with a civilian to enact a campaign of racial intimidation against a highly decorated flag officer of the United States Armed Forces. General Caldwell commands logistical operations that span the globe," Hastings added, his voice cold and precise. "He holds a top-secret security clearance, and you, a sworn officer of the law, decided to assault and kidnap him as a favor to a racist HOA board member." I can explain," Vance choked out, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. "Pendleton, he promised he'd put in a good word for me for a private security contract. I didn't know he was a general. I swear to God I didn't know. It wouldn't matter if he was a cashier at the local grocery store," Higgins snapped, disgust radiating from her face. "The law protects everyone equally, but because he is a general, you have brought the wrath of the federal government down on your head in a way you cannot possibly comprehend." Higgins tapped the table. "Your rookie partner, Miller, he broke down in the lobby. He's currently singing like a bird, outlining every single civil rights violation you forced him to watch over the last 6 months. In exchange for immunity, he's testifying against you." Vance slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, letting out a hollow, defeated sob. His career was over. His freedom was gone. His life as he knew it was effectively terminated. Meanwhile, in the sterile, high-security corridors of the Pentagon, Major General Joseph Caldwell was not crying. He was working. He had been cleared by the Pentagon's medical team, the bruising on his wrists photographed and documented for the DOJ, and had immediately changed into a fresh, impeccably tailored Class A uniform. The stars on his shoulders gleamed under the hallway lights. He walked into the secure briefing room of Lieutenant General Richard Montgomery, who was waiting for him, a deep scowl etched into his weathered face. "Joe," Montgomery said, standing up from his heavy mahogany desk. "I saw the initial DOJ report. It's worse than we thought. Premeditated racial targeting." "I read it, Richard," Joseph replied calmly, taking a seat opposite him. "It is disappointing, but not entirely surprising. The arrogance of unchecked authority often breeds this kind of systemic rot. The Attorney General is personally overseeing the prosecution," Montgomery assured him, sitting back down. "Vance is looking at 10 to 15 years in federal lockup. The HOA board member, Pendleton, was arrested an hour ago by the FBI, and the precinct captain is being forced to resign by the end of the day." Joseph nodded slowly. "That solves the immediate problem, but it doesn't solve the systemic one." "What do you mean?" "That regional department is heavily armed, Richard," Joseph said, leaning forward, his eyes sharp and calculating. "When I was in that precinct, I noted the tactical gear. They have surplus M4 carbines, military-grade body armor, and according to my logistics review, they acquired 2 MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, through the 1033 surplus program last year." Montgomery frowned. "Standard operating procedure for many local departments nowadays. A department that fosters a culture where officers feel comfortable hunting minorities as a favor to an HOA does not need, nor deserve, weapons of war," Joseph stated firmly. "They lack the discipline, the oversight, and the moral compass required to wield that equipment. If they treat a jogger like an enemy combatant, what do you think they will do with an MRAP during a peaceful protest?" Montgomery sighed, rubbing his chin. "You want to pull their toys." "I want to strip them to the studs," Joseph corrected. "I am submitting a formal recommendation to the Department of Defense Logistics Agency to immediately recall all military-grade surplus equipment from that department, citing severe breaches of constitutional protocol. Furthermore, I am requesting a nationwide audit of the 1033 program. If local departments want to play soldier, they need to be held to the Uniform Code of Military Justice standard. Since they aren't, they lose the gear." Montgomery looked at the fiercely intelligent man sitting across from him. He couldn't help but smile slightly. Vance hadn't just arrested a general, he had arrested a master tactician who knew exactly how to dismantle the very system that empowered his abusers. "Draft the order, General Caldwell," Montgomery said. "You have my full authorization." 9 months later, the blistering heat of the Texas summer baked the pavement outside the United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas. The media circus that had surrounded the General Caldwell incident had finally reached its crescendo. Inside the heavily air-conditioned courtroom, the atmosphere was tense and suffocating. Judge Thomas Barrett, a stern man with a reputation for merciless sentencing in civil rights cases, looked down from the bench. At the defense table sat Marcus Vance. He had aged 10 years in the last 9 months. Stripped of his badge, his uniform, and his arrogant swagger, he looked incredibly small. He wore an ill-fitting gray suit, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed firmly on the polished wood of the table in front of him. At the prosecution table sat William Hastings and a team of DOJ lawyers. In the gallery, sitting perfectly upright in his dress uniform, was Major General Joseph Caldwell. He had declined to give a victim impact statement. He didn't view himself as a victim. He viewed himself as the catalyst for necessary justice. "Mr. Vance, Judge Barrett's voice boomed through the courtroom, instantly silencing the murmurs of the gallery. "Please stand." Vance stood, his legs visibly trembling. His defense attorney placed a supportive hand on his arm, but it offered no comfort. "Marcus Vance, a federal jury has found you guilty of deprivation of rights under color of law and conspiracy against rights," Judge Barrett began, peering over his reading glasses. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a blatant, cowardly abuse of authority. You were entrusted with a badge and a gun to protect your community. Instead, you weaponized that power to act as a prejudiced mercenary for a local neighborhood dispute. You targeted a decorated veteran simply because you believed his skin color meant he did not belong in a neighborhood he had rightfully earned his place in." Vance squeezed his eyes shut, a single tear tracking down his cheek. "Your actions have not only destroyed your own life, but have cast a deep, shameful shadow over the thousands of honorable police officers who wear the uniform with integrity," the judge continued, his voice rising in controlled anger. "Because of your actions, your former department is now under a strict federal consent decree, completely stripped of its tactical assets and federal funding. You have disgraced your profession, your city, and yourself." Judge Barrett picked up a stack of papers and adjusted them on his desk. "It is the sentence of this court that you, Marcus Vance, be remanded to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a term of 144 months, 12 years, without the possibility of early parole." A loud gasp echoed through the courtroom. Vance's knees buckled. If his attorney hadn't caught him, he would have collapsed to the floor. 12 years in a federal penitentiary as a former cop was a terrifying, agonizing fate. "Furthermore," Judge Barrett added, striking his gavel sharply against the sounding block, "you are permanently stripped of your law enforcement certification nationwide, and your municipal pension is hereby forfeited. Court is adjourned." The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open. Federal marshals immediately stepped forward, grabbing Vance by the arms. As they turned him to lead him out of the courtroom, his eyes briefly met Joseph's in the gallery. Joseph did not smile. He did not sneer. He simply offered him a cold, definitive nod of acknowledgement. The war was over, and he had won. A week later, the autumn air was returning to Southlake, Texas. The oak trees were beginning to turn shades of amber and gold, and the morning mist hung low over the manicured lawns. At 5:42 a.m., the neighborhood was completely still. Major General Joseph Caldwell stepped out of the front door of 402 Oak Crest Drive. He was wearing his faded West Point sweatshirt, black running tights, and his black fleece beanie. He stretched his legs on the porch, adjusting the phone in his armband. He stepped off the porch and began his jog, his rhythmic footfalls breaking the morning silence. As he rounded the corner onto the main avenue, headlights cut through the mist. A newly marked police cruiser rolled slowly down the street. It wasn't an aggressive crawl. It was a steady, standard patrol. The cruiser approached him. Joseph maintained his pace, his heart rate steady, his breathing controlled. He didn't look away, but he didn't brace for a fight either. As the police car passed by, the officer in the driver's seat, a young woman who had just transferred to the newly reformed department, rolled down her window. She didn't shine a spotlight. She didn't hit the siren. She simply looked at Joseph, offered a respectful, deferential nod, and gave a small wave. "Good morning, General," the officer called out politely over the hum of the engine. "Good morning, officer," Joseph replied, his voice calm and strong. The cruiser continued on its way, turning at the end of the block and disappearing into the dawn. Joseph Caldwell kept running, his stride long and unbroken, the heavy weight of justice resting comfortably on his shoulders as the sun finally broke over the horizon. The terrifying reality is that this could happen to anyone. General Caldwell's story proves that unchecked authority and dangerous prejudices can hide behind a badge, and sometimes it takes a monumental collision with the truth to force systemic change. He fought back not with violence, but with the undeniable power of the law, dismantling a corrupt system from the inside out. This story is a powerful reminder that true authority doesn't come from a badge, a title, or the power to intimidate. It comes from character, integrity, and an unshakable sense of self. In a world where prejudices can still blind people to the truth, General Caldwell showed us that the ultimate victory isn't won through anger or matching violence with violence. It's won through the quiet dignity of standing your ground, knowing your worth, and letting justice do the heavy lifting. It takes immense strength to let an adversary dig their own grave while you remain entirely unbroken. We've all faced moments where we felt unseen or unfairly judged, though perhaps not on this grand, systemic scale. It makes you think, how would you have handled that quiet morning under the blinding glare of those lights? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this incredible turnaround. Have you ever had to rely on sheer discipline to overcome an unfair situation? Drop your perspective in the comments below. Let's start a real conversation. And if stories of resilience and systemic accountability resonate with you, consider subscribing to the channel. We're glad to have you here.